Honoured guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to St Mary's Hall, one of the most stunning spaces in late medieval England. My name's Peter Walters, and I'm a member of the Tudor Coventry Community Interest Company, set up, among other things, to highlight the story of this wonderful place and draw attention to the treasures that it contains, principally the Coventry tapestry on the wall behind me. Let me at this point introduce you to the people who will be entertaining you and I hope giving you some food for thought tonight. First, the Bolton Trombone Quartet, made up of city and county musicians who are tonight playing music from the Renaissance. I don't know about you, but I thought it was a fantastic sound earlier on. We've already heard them. The anthem that they played for the Lord Mayor was written especially for this occasion, and we'll be hearing them at other points during the evening, playing from the gallery where in the 15th century the town band or waits played. Next, you will see from the synopsis that alongside some short poems specially written for this occasion, which tell a little of our local story, we're going to hear some of Shakespeare's most famous words in this room tonight. And to speak those words, I'm delighted to introduce a fabulous group of actors from that wonderful city theatre, the Criterion Theatre. Ladies and gentlemen, the players. I first saw Jonathan Foyle on a rope hanging precariously from the spire of the cathedral behind us, casually discussing details of its decoration for a Channel 4 series on climbing great buildings. Later, he was chief executive of the World Monuments Fund and spent a good deal of time in Coventry, helping to mastermind a huge project to clean and catalogue the cathedral's medieval glass. Not only is he a climber and television historian, he's an artist, an archaeologist, a writer and a speaker, and tonight he's going to be narrating for us Coventry's story in the fascinating and bloody century that gave us the treasures in this room. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage our narrator tonight, Dr. Jonathan Foyle.
Thank you, my lords, ladies and gentlemen. This is the very first time this freshly scripted production has been staged, so just a couple of words on what we're trying to achieve tonight. Basically, we're playing to Coventry's strengths as a tremendous historic city which should be much more celebrated than it is. And as a historian, I have to tell you, this is one of my favourite buildings, so it's a great privilege to do that tonight. William Shakespeare would certainly have known of this place. It's possible he performed in this space too, before he went on to write the histories of the kings and queens that defined what we've come to call the Wars of the Roses. The 15th century never used such a name for its aristocratic conflicts. They never knew their last monarch as Tudor, as we do. But history is written by the winners. The so-called Tudors did win, and Shakespeare was a product of their age. However, his birth in 1564, and he was baptized today, came over a century and a half after the start of the events we will explore. Much in his plays describes how he imagined things to have been, skewed to favor the outcome as if it were natural or inevitable. Therefore, what we see in turn comes through a distorted, even cracked lens. We're going to try and wipe that lens clean tonight of a dimly understood century, whilst importantly having fun. In a book on Shakespeare's work of 1906, Henry Brodrib Irving and Frank Albert Marshall declared of Coventry that the most remarkable building in the city is unquestionably St Mary's Hall in Bailey Lane, facing St Michael's Church. This was before Coventry's modernisation with great boulevards as a transport city, and before the Blitz. So before all that change and destruction, this singular building remains so remarkably intact as to be recognizable to the kings and queens we will hear about tonight, who walked and talked within these walls long before Shakespeare even existed. And so there's no better place in the country in which to tell this story. Part 1. The year is 1398. Our king, is Richard II, the son of that renowned warrior against the French at the Battle of Poitiers in Crécy 50 years past, known as Edward, who you call the Black Prince, who in turn was the son of Edward III, who reigned for half of this century and has rebuilt Windsor Castle. On that Berkshire cliff-top fortress, before the old king grew his long hair and his long beard, he raised the standard of St. George, bound his knights with garters of loyalty, and recast the English arms so that the lions of England were now combined with the lilies of France, to which he held claim from his French mother. This Edward III, King Richard's own grandfather, was the monarch from whom all English rulers will seek to claim descent by bloodline, by red blood or white blood. Our King Richard is from neither red nor white. And I'll tell you this, not everyone wishes well for him. If he were here, he might say, I tell you, my subjects, if everyone reckoned upon the genius of Richard II, then no sane man would challenge me, and this land would be heaven permanently. You'll hear more poetry interspersed with Shakespeare's words tonight. But what your descendants will come to call the Wars of the Roses will soon be kindled. It will be an issue of issue, a fight between cousins. As the eldest son of Edward III, the Black Prince, our king's father, could himself have become king with a cascade of sons, a dynasty to span the decades, avoiding the whole problem. But the Black Prince had died aged 46, to be buried near Thomas Becket at Canterbury. Then his only son, our King Richard, was a boy of just 9, thrown into his father's seat, or if you prefer, seated in his father's throne. The challenges that this boy king has faced, everyone still listens in fear to tales of the Great Plague, which in 1348 began its 3-year-long scything across our land to take a third of the nation's souls, 4 million gone to the pits. Taxation followed a diminished workforce, and 17 years ago, at the age of 14, Richard faced Wat Tyler at Greenwich, taking the People's March to London. Another was John Ball, the libertarian priest captured and tried here in Coventry to be quartered before the king. So Richard the Boy King prevailed, building a court of favourites. He prevailed against the rebellion of the Lords Appellant, who disliked his favourites and hated this rule by tyranny and caprice. From 1386, they took arms against Richard's lackeys and diminished his standing. At first, there were 3 main Lords Appellant, including Thomas of Woodstock, Duke of Gloucester, son of Edward III, and thus the king's uncle, later joined by Henry Bolingbroke, Earl of Derby, his own cousin. And the work of Thomas of Woodstock and Henry Bolingbroke is not over. The merciless Parliament of 1388 saw trial and death as the king pursued his detractors to the grave. He was building no bridge to heaven. At 15, Richard had married Anne of Bohemia, creating a court of cosmopolitan splendor and richness. But he's not had a son and heir of his own, with either Anne, whose untimely death left him distraught, nor yet the second of his 2 queens, Isabella of Valois. They were betrothed but 2 years past. It does seem unlikely they'll have children, given that she's even now 8 years old, and she's being guarded at Wallingford Castle, 70 miles south of here, by the Lord High Treasurer, William Le Scrope. So here we are in 1398 in Coventry, the heart of the Lancastrian stronghold, and you ask what Lancastrian means. Well, 5 miles to our southwest, King Richard's uncle, John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, the second son of Edward III, has only recently rebuilt the castle of Kenilworth. In red stone, he fell out with the Londoners and joined the Holy Trinity Guild of Coventry. It's through John of Gaunt that the bloodline of the Lancastrian Red Rose flows, and it flows on through his son, who is Henry of Bolingbroke, the knight who has ventured across Europe in search of demons to slay. As one of the Lord's Appellants against Richard II, he'll get his chance at home. In Coventry, we stand at the centre of this realm, and you might think these lands are the enclave of the royal family. Some family this, though. And yes, some lands are royal. King Richard's father, the Black Prince, called Coventry the Camera Principis, the Prince's Chamber, a city-state that checked the power of the priory, just 100 yards from us. The priory had all the strength before, you see. And pilgrims still come to see an arm of St. Augustine of Hippo or St. Osberg's head, relics of Becket, St. Cecilia, St. James, St. George, St. Jerome, St. Andrew, St. Lawrence, and St. Catherine, part of the true cross, if you'd like, and a piece of the most holy jawbone of the ass that killed Abel. Everyone says this city's prospered better since the guilds were united in the days of the Black Prince, when he took to his mother's manor at Charlesmore, which King Richard has now inherited, and from that estate he's given us the stone that builds the city walls, stretching around the fine church of St. John the Baptist in Bablake. Do you know, we've gone from the 19th richest town to the 3rd. The Camera Principis is the elephant with the castle on its back, the symbol of Coventry's strength. Coventry may be well, but the country suffers. In this year, 1398, Richard summons a packed parliament to Shrewsbury, which declares no restraint can legally be put on him. It delegates all parliamentary power to a committee of 12 lords and 6 commoners chosen from the king's friends, making Richard an absolute ruler, unbound by the necessity of gathering parliament ever again. As you heard, Richard appeals to his subjects as if he were Christ's counterpart on earth. Look at him in this portrait, with an orb of the world and the cross on that world, as if he were Christ himself. All kings do it, but his appeals will soon fall on deaf ears. After 21 years on the throne, he's still young, yet he has but 1 year left to reign. Of course, he doesn't yet know it. In this reeking atmosphere of tyranny, I've learned of a remark by Thomas de Mowbray, the first Duke of Norfolk. He was one of the rebel nobles who deposed some of the king's court favourites 11 years ago. De Mowbray worked his way back into the king's good graces, but is likely instrumental in the murder just last year of the king's uncle and one of the senior lords appellant, Thomas of Woodstock, the first Duke of Gloucester, who was taken to Calais under the king's orders and imprisoned. Woodstock was murdered there, choked by a white rag, some say. The king is suspected of ordering the deed, but mutual suspicions inflame the ire of Thomas de Mowbray of Caledon Castle, who has accused Henry Bolingbroke of treason. King Richard agrees they should fight a duel at Gosford Green between Caledon and Coventry. Now, in these modern times approaching 1400, we all know that England's patron saint, St. George, was born at Caledon Castle, don't we? So will de Mowbray be a St. George, or will Henry Bolingbroke break? Before the fatal encounter can be fought, King Richard refuses the fight, sending Bolingbroke into exile in Paris for 10 years. De Mowbray is sent abroad for life on the 19th of October. As we feel the chill air of winter, John of Gaunt is dying. We will remember him as a knight, as son of a king, a friend of Geoffrey Chaucer, the father of Henry Bolingbroke. And John of Gaunt's deathbed speech in King Richard II, Act 2, Scene 1, prophesies the downfall of England under Richard's tyranny.
This royal throne of kings, this sceptred isle, this earth of majesty, this seat of Mars, this other Eden, demi-paradise, this fortress built by nature for herself against infection and the hand of war, this happy breed of men, this little world, this precious stone set in the silver sea, which serves it in the office of a wall or as a moat defensive to a house against the envy of less happier lands. This blessed plot, this earth, this realm, this England, this nurse, this teeming womb of royal kings, feared by their breed and famous for their birth, renowned for their deeds, as far from home for Christian service and true chivalry as is the sepulchre in stubborn jury of the world's ransom, Blessed Mary's Son. This land of such dear, dear souls, this dear, dear land, dear for her reputation through the world, is now leased out. I die pronouncing it, like to a tenement or a pelting farm. England, bound in with the triumphant sea, whose rocky shore beats back the envious siege of watery Neptune, is now bound in with shame, with inky blots and rotten parchment bonds. That England that was wont to conquer others had made a shameful conquest of itself. Ah, would the scandal vanish with my life? How happy then were my ensuing death.
Death is indeed ensuing, and John of Gaunt dies on a winter's day, the 3rd of February, 1399. At the Gosford duel that never happened, Richard had exiled Gaunt's son and rightful inheritor Henry Bolingbroke for 10 years. Now the king took his uncle John of Gaunt's lands for himself. Henry Bolingbroke, Richard's cousin of the Red Rose, is coming over the horizon. Bolingbroke is not the rightful inheritor of the throne. That is the line of Edward III's second son, Lionel, Duke of Clarence. But Henry has might and seething injustice on his side. He's returning to England with Thomas Arundel, Archbishop of Canterbury, who's also been exiled by Richard's tyranny. And together they're planning a campaign. Remember William le Scrope, the guardian of Richard's child bride Isabella, the 8-year-old down at Wallingford? Condemned without trial at Bristol this July, his head is taken in a white basket to be put on a spike in London Bridge. There are two ways to govern, through fear and through inspiration. King Richard's search to persuade of his heaven on earth invested a king's ransom in the new and vast oak roof over Westminster Hall, the largest in Europe. It's just finished, like a great upturned ship arrayed with angels. And look above you tonight. Here too in Coventry's fortified town, angels are being carved for the town hall, including King Richard's white antelope. And here is the Mayor of Coventry to tell you more.
The Hall of St. Mary's is building now. They keep their secrets, so don't ask how the masons shape these stones so fine to form a place where men shall dine. And men we are who run this town, and I'll tell you this and note the frown. The guilds keep trades within confines to buy, sell, seek redemption divine. So they pay for chapels in Michael's church, yea, they pay the priest to daily search for God to favour the mercantile, through prayers in chapels in every aisle. Oh, this hall we build, all to impress the people who all can properly dress in Coventry blue, fine hats from the city. All people, that is, except those we pity. And if this should be our Westminster small, it's fit for a king, his courtiers and all. As we legislate well, these angels will call with trumpet and honour, Hail Mary's Hall.
As the gentleman told us, this is no normal guild hall, but a place of civic governance, much like Westminster. Those who rule on earth appeal to the rulers in heaven. The Virgin Mary is the Queen of Paradise, to whom this guild and their hall is named. And she resides in the perennial spring garden with her son Christ. But Richard II, the Christ incarnate, is now losing his bid as heaven's governor on earth. Bolingbroke has imprisoned him in Pontefract Castle in Yorkshire. In September 1399, Richard abdicates with 5 months left to live, for he's slowly starving to death in a dungeon. If he's like Christ, it's as a man of sorrows, as Shakespeare's soliloquy of his character reveals. From Richard II, Act 3, Scene 2.
For God's sake, let us sit upon the ground and tell sad stories of the death of kings. How some have been deposed, some slain in war, some haunted by the ghosts they have deposed, some poisoned by their wives, some sleeping killed, all murdered. For within the hollow crown that rounds the mortal temple of a king keeps death his court. And there the antic sits, scoffing at his state and grinning at his pomp, allowing him a little breath, a little scene, to monarchize, be feared, and kill with looks, infusing him with self and vain conceit, as if this flesh, which walls about our life, were brass, impregnable. And, humoured thus, comes at the last, and with a little pin bores through the castle walls. And farewell, King.
Farewell indeed, King Richard, and God save King Henry IV, for Henry Bolingbroke will now be crowned. Coventry's town walls are approaching completion, a ring of towers 44 years in the making that now encircle and ennoble this city, and that no force can level. They'll still be standing in 1,000 years, unless there's a real calamity. It must be said there is trouble in the land. The northern families revolt against the new king, the powerful Percy family being routed at Shrewsbury. We move forward to 1404, and King Henry calls for a parliament to be held, not in Westminster, but here in Coventry, within the painted walls of the chapter house of St. Mary's Priory, 100 yards away. No lawyers are welcome here, for King Henry doesn't care for them. Like Richard, he prefers to apply his own laws. During this Parliament, the House of Commons tries to control the King's household spending, as the Crown's own holdings should be able to cover the King's expenditure without draining the government's coffers too. Archbishop Scrope of York, the builder of the East End of York Minster, is here in Coventry too, and he's watching this Parliament carefully, not just because the King plans to confiscate the property of ecclesiasts like him, but because Henry killed his brother, William. It was his head taken from Bristol to London in the basket and then put on London Bridge. Now that cut deep, and Scrope thinks he has God on his side. The Archbishop thinks the king owes him. Scrope had, after all, received the abdication of Richard when he was at Pontefract and relayed the news to Henry. And indeed, he had escorted Henry Bolingbroke to the vacant throne. Plus, since Archbishop Thomas Becket was slain under the orders of Henry II in 1170, kings were wary of calling for ill to befall archbishops. That is, until now. For this summer, as the Percys had attempted before, Scrope has the confidence to mount a northern rebellion of 8,000 men led by 3 knights. It's doomed, for when the king suggests a negotiation at Pontefract Castle, where Richard had starved, Scrope believes his safety is guaranteed. He's beheaded on the 8th of June, 1405. Scrope requesting the headsman to deal him 5 blows in remembrance of the 5 wounds of Christ. Here then is another man of sorrows. The Pope demands penance from King Henry, whose conscience grows deeply uneasy, and from this year his health diminishes, as Shakespeare's personification reveals in Henry IV, Part 2, Act 3, Scene 1.
How many thousands of my poorest subjects are at this hour asleep? Oh, sleep, oh, gentle sleep, nature's soft nurse. How have I frighted thee that thou no more will weigh my eyelids down and steep my senses in forgetfulness? Why rather, sleep, liest thou in smoky cribs upon uneasy pallets stretching thee, and hushed with buzzing night flies to thy slumber, than in the perfumed chambers of the great, under the canopies of costly state, and lulled with sound of sweetest melody? O thou dull god, Why lies thou with the vile in loathsome beds, and leaves the kingly couch a watch case or a common larum bell? Wilt thou upon the high and giddy mast seal up the shipboy's eyes and rock his brains in cradle of the rude imperious surge? And in the visitation of the winds who take the ruffian billows by the top, curling their monstrous heads and hanging them with deafing clamour in the slippery clouds, that with the hurly death itself awakes? Canst thou, O partial sleep, give thy repose to the wet sea boy in an hour so rude? And in the calmest, most stillest night, with all appliances and means to boot, deny it to a king? Then, happy low, lie down. Uneasy lies the head that wears a crown.
As it happened, there were some better relations between Coventry and York that year, in the clamour and rattle of a glassmaker's workshop in the centre of this town. Should we swing open his oak door, we would encounter the glass painter John Thornton. He's about to go to York to finish poor Scrope's fine cathedral.
Transparent, translucent, opaque. What visions do glass painters make? Blown glass called quarries I take, stain and draw 'em, then second bake. The colours I so often choose are yellows to gold more than blues. The glow of their luminous hues will ensure the light is suffused. The lines seeming black that I draw, iron oxide and gum, nothing more. A brush on the eyeballs, the jaw, a tumble of locks you'll adore. What sort of themes do I paint? Scene from the Bible, a saint? Well, nothing I show can be faint. I'm bold, there's no point to restraint. Coventry's where I've impressed. At St. Michael's, I just showed my best. And an agent me duly addressed from York Minster, at their behest. Yes, so now up to York I will go, to glaze its great east window, for its dean and chapter will show me money and means, don't you know? Some years it will take, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 or 20. They'll pay me more funds should I stay. Me, John Thornton of Coventry.
Hooray for John Thornton, some of whose glass may remain in the matrix of this bay window. Soon comes news of the death of Henry IV in 1413. We move forward 2 years into the reign of his son, Henry V, the grandson of John of Gaunt of Kenilworth, who was once this new king's guardian. The misery and tyranny and a murdered archbishop is giving way to this youthful knight, slim with dark hair cropped in a ring above the ears, somewhat monkish-like in style. He's clean-shaven, with a ruddy complexion, lean with a pointed nose, but a cheekbone bears the scar of an arrow wound, the price of defeating that northern Percy family back in 1403. There's a reason why we only see him in profile. Depending on his mood, his eyes flash from the mildness of a dove's to the brilliance of a lion's, and he manages domestic issues firmly. The threat of lollardy, of embracing the vernacular word of the English for worship, is becoming prevalent amongst weavers, and yes, that means here in Coventry. Some Coventrians are demeaning a statue of the Virgin Mary set in a stone gate within these new walls. They'll have to be very careful in their city, in their workshops, in their homes. But they won't be seen by Henry's own eyes. He's in France, settling unfinished business from the war that has ensued since 1337. Now in the year 1415, he plans an attack with favourites like old John Talbot, as Shakespeare immortalises the setting of the Battle of Agincourt, on the eve of which the king appealed to the Virgin, protectress of her dower, her dowry being England. Unless you're a wretched lollard, you might think of Coventry as the Virgin's own city, and this her own hall. Here, through Shakespeare, speaks Henry V. In Henry V, Act 4, Scene 3 at the English camp at Agincourt.
This day is called the Feast of Crispian. He that outlives this day and comes safe home will stand a tiptoe when this day is named, and rouse him at the name of Crispian. He that shall live this day and see old age will yearly on the vigil feast his neighbours and say, "Tomorrow is Saint Crispian." Then will he strip his sleeve and show his scars and say, "These wounds I had on Crispian's day." Old men forget, yet all shall be forgot, but he'll remember with advantages what feats he did that day. Then shall our names, familiar in his mouth as household words, Harry the King, Bedford and Exeter, Warwick and Talbot, Salisbury and Gloucester, be in their flowing cups freshly remembered. This story shall the good man teach his son. And Crispin shall ne'er go by from this day to the ending of the world. But we in it shall be remembered. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. For he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother. Be he ne'er so vile, this day shall gentle his condition. And gentlemen in England now abed shall think themselves accursed they were not here, and hold their manhoods cheap, whilst any speaks that fought with us upon St. Crispin's Day.
The Battle of Agincourt was brutal. The flower of the French nobility scythed. But it has brought prestige for England and a queen in Catherine of Valois, accompanied by a dowry of 600,000 crowns. Let England build, let England rejoice. And on the 14th of December, 1421, let it greet a son and heir in Prince Henry, the namesake of his father. Yet the father's time on earth is limited, and now he writes his will, as recorded in Hall's Chronicles.
This I say, if you love me, you ought to love my child, not for his desert, but for mine. And since I now shall be taken from you, I charge you all to render your allegiance unto my son, King Henry VI. And as touching the estate of my realm, I command you to love and join together in one league and unfeigned amity. I will that my brother Humphrey shall be protector of England during the minority of my child, and that my brother Bedford, with the Duke of Burgundy, shall rule and be regent of our realm of France, commanding him with fire and sword to persecute Charles, calling himself Dauphin, to the intent either to bring him into obeisance or to expel him out of our territories. What I have gotten, I charge you, keep it. I command you, defend it. And I desire you to nourish it.
Henry then is desperate to secure the accession to France for his son, and that Charles VI should not become Charles VII. There is not much time left in his life, but for us, ladies and gentlemen, life goes on. And I'm here to tell you that we're approaching the break, wherein there are 100 glasses of wine, about 100 god cakes, 3 toilets, and 20 minutes. Good luck. We'll see you after the break.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the second part of our entertainment tonight. I hope you enjoyed the God cakes. Not to everybody's taste, but I quite like them myself. First of all, let me bring back to the stage our actors from the Criterion. And of course, Jonathan Foyle.
Now then, where were we?
What I have gotten, I charge you, keep it. I command you, defend it. And I desire you to nourish it.
That's right. Now, young Prince Henry is only 8 months old when his father dies at the end of August 1422. How shall he be nourished for the next 18 years? By his uncles Warwick, Beaufort, John Duke of Bedford? Can England wait for the man to emerge? In that long wait for his commanding voice as king, would France be utterly lost in a clamour for control, or recaptured by a nobility acting in unison? Shakespeare himself tells us what to expect in the epilogue to King Henry V.
Thus far, with rough and all unable pen, our bending author has pursued his story. In little room, confining mighty men, mangling by starts the full course of their glory. Small time. But in that small, most greatly lived this star of England. Fortune made his sword, by which the world's best garden was achieved, and of it left his son, imperial lord. Henry VI, in infant bands, crowned king of France and England, did this king succeed, whose state so many had the managing that they lost France and made his England bleed.
England will bleed. They lost France, but this boy king was crowned twice in Paris and in Westminster. How could it happen? Henry VI comes to the throne in the first year of his life, although that throne was more a high chair. His guardians do not always nourish that boy, but pursue their own interests. In 1422, it's confirmed that Henry should rightfully be made King of France at the death of his insane maternal grandfather, Charles VI, as his father had hoped. But the claim becomes contested, as his father had feared. As you might expect, John, Duke of Bedford, when acting as Marshal in France, had to take up the fight. In 1429, the French install the entirely sane King Charles VII. Joan of Arc sees a vision from St. Michael that commands her to defend that new French king, and her success at the siege of Orleans sees her death by flames in 1431. In those early and anxious years of Henry's growth, Saint-Michel is felt in the heart of this city, the spire of St. Michael's, built by the Buttoner brothers and sisters, it turns out.
Buttoner! We grew our wealth from a button. Fine gentry we, no farmers of mutton.
Buttoner, we are brother and brother. In the family way, we support one another.
Coventry grows from fashionable trades like cloth and hats and sleeves and braids.
And buttons, at least those we produce. We're wealthy, that even you can deduce.
Now, if you dressed the nation so well and lived within the sound of the bells
of St. Michael, Archangel, the devil's scourge, well, there's sweet music, a means to purge.
Your conscience, I'd guess. Anxieties, yes. for forever may prove a hell of a mess.
If the devil lives on amidst our people, lest Coventry be denied a fine steeple.
From buttons come pennies, shillings and pounds. All right, others helped. We did do the rounds.
But the buttoner name will climb ever higher to the realm of St. Michael, this our spire.
Now then, sirs.
Now then, misters, we two are the Buttoners sisters.
A gap of 50 years we span. My name's Mary.
My name's Anne.
We found your steeple quite unfinished.
Without a spire, it was diminished.
So we too, these boys' relations,
Entertained no hesitations.
their work truncated, we wouldn't tire.
Till we had built St. Michael's spire.
And after half a century, see,
Built for Anne and Mary, her and me.
Cool, no domestic that one, was it? Their steeple of St. Michael's points to heaven from the centre of the realm of St. George, heavenly dragon slayers, both saints. But the merchants are being brought down to earth, and here be dragons too, for Bristol, Boston and Coventry are all passing their peak. The wool trade is shifting to East Anglia, where timber houses and wool churches are growing, while Gloucestershire and Wiltshire grow rich from the backs of sheep. Now in the 1440s, Henry VI has arrived at his maturity and is investing his money not in troops, to the annoyance of many nobles, but in fine buildings. Eton College, which will educate countless generations of fine leaders, all men of piety and conscience, no doubt, who will graduate to the new King's College with a huge chapel at Cambridge. Lest we forget, the king has lost his father's gains in France, retaining only Calais. As a sovereign, he is weak. His nobles squabble for power. In the hope of achieving peace in 1445, Henry marries Charles VII's niece, Margaret of Anjou, an ambitious and strong-willed woman who would become an effective power behind the throne. It looks like capitulation. Henry's loss of France, loss of direction, accompanies a loss of mental health. Richard Plantagenet, Duke of York, is the closest adult relative of the king. He's a great-grandson of Edward III through his fourth son, Edmund, 1st Duke of York, while his wife Anne is descended through Edward II's second son, Lionel, Duke of Clarence. Richard and Anne have inherited vast lands and wealth and influence. Her line were the rightful inheritors after Richard II, and so as a couple they have a claim to the throne and have not forgotten the usurpation of Henry IV. Richard holds Queen Margaret of Anjou in particular contempt. A French queen on an English throne, engineering the surrender of the lands Henry V had won, lands his family should have governed. In this political turmoil, Coventry is about to play its trump card. Isn't trump a lovely word? It reminds one of the trumpets of these angels. Adorable trump, heavenly trump, unimpeachable trump. In the midsummer of 1450, an uprising in Kent brings the king and queen to Coventry. The following year, King Henry VI grants Coventry a charter, making this a county in itself. In 1453, the king and queen produce a son and heir, Prince Edward. In that same year, Henry begins to suffer a series of serious mental breakdowns, while he sides with the Percy family, driving their powerful rivals, the Nevilles, into the Yorkist camp. Tensions mount between Margaret of Anjou and Richard of York over control of the government. And on the 22nd of May, 1455, we watch in horror as the Battle of St. Albans breaks. The protagonists are King Henry VI, supported by Edmund Beaufort, 2nd Duke of Somerset, and Richard, Duke of York. Henry VI is taken prisoner, and Richard is declared Lord Protector. When Henry emerges, so to Coventry again come the King and Queen. This mini Westminster will be embellished as befits a setting for that royal court, the seat of Parliament for half a decade. But what message could this mute king relay? About this time, the great window before you was made by a master glazier following in the wake of John Thornton, who died 20 years ago. It shows Henry VI in the centre, looking forward in confidence, as if the forgotten model for Holbein's Henry VIII. Here is King Arthur, William the Conqueror, Richard the Lionheart, Henry III, who built Westminster Abbey, Henry VI himself, Edward III. For everyone must claim righteous descent from the roots of that rosebush. There's Henry IV for all of his faults, and Father Henry V. And at the end, a surprise appearance by the Emperor Constantine. He was, after all, the ruler who was crowned, made emperor in England, who brought Christianity to the Roman Empire. Hence, his orb is particularly large and covered in spring-like flowers. This luminous screen before the worthies of this great city cleverly obscures the fact that Henry's mental health has worsened. Now Queen Margaret of Anjou takes the reins.
The Coventry Leet Book was compiled between 1420 and 1555. It was a record of key events which took place in a period when Coventry, although declining, remained a centre of commerce and still one of England's principal cities. In 1456, Queen Margaret, accompanied by her young son, Prince Edward, and her husband, King Henry VI, make a ceremonial visit here, at which a pageant in their honour is held. At the time, the king may still have been suffering from the illness which had severely afflicted him for more than a year, and which prevented him from taking an active part in the government of his country.
Yes, because the seat of government is effectively being removed to Coventry, and the chief offices of state are allotted to intimates of the Queen.
The royal family moved between various places within the city, at each of which tributes are paid to them in elaborate and flattering speeches by characters held in esteem. At Bablake Church, speeches are delivered by the biblical prophets Isaiah and Jeremiah. Within the gate at the east end of the church, the Christian saints Edward the Confessor and John the Evangelist speak to the royal family.
At Smithford Street, voice is given to the cardinal virtues by righteousness, temperance, strength, and prudence. Close to Cross Cheaping, it is the conquerors who speak: Hector, Alexander the Great, Joshua, David, Josephus, King Arthur, Charlemagne, Julius Caesar, and Geoffrey, King of Jerusalem. And finally, after she slays the great dragon, Saint Margaret of Antioch addresses them at Cross Cheaping.
Of all mortal women, supreme princess, Lady Margaret, the chief source of happiness in this realm, you are heartily welcome to this city of Coventry. Your pleasure is my highest wish, and since we share a common name, both by nature and from respect, I will show you only kindness. My power will not serve you ill.
That character, St. Margaret of Antioch, is the patron saint of childbirth. Her namesake, the Queen, has brought her son and heir to show the future is now assured, or so she wants to convince us. As order disintegrates across the country in the following months, England moves closer to outright civil war. In June, a great council is summoned at Coventry. The Duke of York refuses to appear. Armed conflict eventually breaks out in the autumn. On the 23rd of September, York's ally, the Earl of Salisbury, defeats Lancastrian forces at Blore Heath in Staffordshire. 2 months later, on the 20th of November 1459, the Parliament of Devils opens in the chapter house of St. Mary's Priory with a speech by the Chancellor William Waynflete, Bishop of Winchester, preaching on the text, "Grace to you and peace be multiplied," but the government's purpose is undoubtedly to condemn York and his kinsmen and allies as traitors. When the Battle of Northampton is fought on 10th of July 1460, the first English conflict with artillery, Queen Margaret and her 7-year-old son Edward are installed at Eccleshall Castle near Coventry. They flee to North Wales to ally with Jasper Tudor. Meanwhile, Henry VI is captured at Northampton and taken to London. Faced with these challenges to his authority as protector, York dispatches his eldest son, also called Edward, to the Welsh marches to contain the Lancastrians in Wales, and he leaves the Earl of Warwick in charge in London. York himself marches to the north of England on the 9th of December, accompanied by his second son Edmund, Earl of Rutland, and the Earl of Salisbury. The scene is set for the Battle of Wakefield on the 30th of December 1460. This Lancastrian victory sees the death of the Duke of York, but as Henry VI remains incarcerated, the support of Richard Neville, called Warwick the Kingmaker, leads to the enthronement of York's son Edward as Edward IV. In Shakespeare's Henry VI, Part 3, Act 1, Scene 4, he represents York's killers as Queen Margaret and John Lord Clifford, whose father was slain by the Yorkists at St Albans. Here they are with Richard, Duke of York.
Brave warriors, Clifford and Northumberland, come. Make him stand upon this molehill here that wrought up mountains with outstretched arms, yet parted but the shadow with his hand. What? Was it you that would be England's king? Was't you that revelled in our parliament and made a preachment of your high descent? Where are your mess of sons to back you now? The wanton Edward and the lusty George. And where's that valiant crook-back prodigy, Dicky, your boy, that with his grumbling voice was wont to cheer his dad in mutinies? Or with the rest? Where is your darling Rutland? Look, York, I stained this napkin with the blood that valiant Clifford with his rapier's point made issue from the bosom of the boy. And if thine eyes can water for his death, I give thee this to dry thy cheeks withal. Alas, poor York, but that I hate thee deadly, I should lament thy miserable state. I prithee grieve to make me merry, York. What? Hath thy fiery heart so parched thine entrails that not a tear can fall for Rutland's death? Why art thou patient, man? Thou shouldst be mad. And I to make thee mad do mock thee thus. Stamp, rave, and fret that I may sing and dance. Thou wouldst be feed, I see, to make me sport. York cannot speak unless he wear a crown. A crown for York. And lords, bow low to him. Hold you his hands whilst I do set it on. Aye, marry, sir, now he looks like a king. Aye, this is he that took King Henry's chair, and this is he was his adopted heir. But how is it that great Plantagenet is crowned too soon and broke his solemn oath? As I bethink me, you should not be king till our King Henry had shook hands with death. And will you pale your head in Henry's glory and rob his temples of the diadem now in his life against your holy oath? Oh, 'tis a fault too unpardonable. Off with the crown, and with the crown his head. And whilst we breathe, take time to do him dead.
That is my office. For my father's sake.
Nay, stay. Let's hear the orisons he makes.
She-wolf of France, but worse than wolves of France, whose tongue more poisons than the adder's tooth. How ill-beseeming is it in thy sex to triumph like an Amazonian trull upon their woes whom fortune captivates. Oh, tiger's heart wrapped in a woman's hide. False Frenchwoman!
Here's for my oath. Here's for my father's death.
And here's to right our gentle-hearted king. Oh.
Open thy gates of mercy, gracious God. My soul flies through these woods to seek out thee.
Off with his head. And set it on York gates. So York can overlook the town of York.
We hope you're having fun. 10 years on, Warwick the Kingmaker has made an enemy of the king he installed. Edward IV and Warwick clash over the direction of foreign policy and over Edward's controversial marriage to the commoner Elizabeth Woodville. Warwick has been in exile, but now in 1470 invades, raising a large army. He chooses a base in Coventry. And he's forged an alliance with Margaret of Anjou. Henry VI is released from prison and rules by name, but he is broken. Warwick is the power behind the throne. King Edward now receives a great boost when Clarence, in command of 4,000 men, deserts Warwick and returns to the Yorkist fold. Edward approaches Coventry to offer battle, but Warwick refuses to leave the safety of these city walls. As Shakespeare relates in King Henry VI, Part 3, Act 5, Scene 1. At the walls of Coventry.
Go, trumpet to the walls and sound a parley.
See how the surly Warwick mans the wall.
Now, Warwick, wilt thou ope the city gates? Speak gentle words and humbly bend thy knee. Call Edward king, and at his hands beg mercy. And he shall pardon thee these outrages.
Nay, rather wilt thou draw thy forces hence. Confess who set thee up and plucked thee down. Call Warwick patron and be penitent, and thou shalt still remain the Duke of York. Henry is my king. Warwick, his subject.
But Warwick's king is Edward's prisoner. And, gallant Warwick, do but answer this. What is the body when the head is off?
Come, Warwick, take the time. Kneel down, kneel down. Oh, nay, when? Strike now, or else the iron cools.
I had rather chop this hand off at a blow, and with the other fling it at thy face, than bear so low a sail to strike to thee.
Sail how thou canst, have wind and tide, thy friend. This hand, fast wound about thy coal-black hair, shall, whilst thy head is warm and new cut off, write in the dust this sentence in thy blood. Wind-changing Warwick now can change no more. What, Warwick? Wilt thou leave the town and fight? Or shall we beat the stones about thine ears?
Alas, I am not cooped here for defence. I will away towards Barnet presently, and bid thee battle, Edward, if thou darest.
Yes, Warwick Edward dares and leads the way. Lords, to the field, St. George and victory!
So off go Edward and Gloucester south to London unopposed. The stage is set for the Battle of Barnet on a foggy Easter Sunday, 14th of April, 1471. Warwick and the Lancastrians take new-fangled artillery, but they overshoot the Yorkists. Edward's youngest brother, Richard, is fighting in his first battle, and Warwick is killed, almost fleeing. As Henry VI spoke through Shakespeare, sad-hearted men much overgone with care. Here sits a king more woeful than you are. To which his son, Prince Edward, replied, "Fie, father, fly! For all your friends have fled, and Warwick rages like a chafed bull. Away, for death doth hold us in pursuit." Though Margaret musters more troops and lands at Weymouth, the Battle of Tewkesbury sees her son, Prince Edward, indeed slain. The Lancastrian heir's voice and hope wasted. Henry VI will soon die. By the end of his life, the king had lost his wits, his 2 kingdoms, and his only son. Now Edward IV rules unchallenged for a dozen years under the symbol of a sun behind his white rose, if he himself were a son born from purity in spite of his mother's reputation. His own boy, Edward V, will never be crowned. With his brother, Richard, Duke of York, his lasting fame is as one of the princes in the Tower, which enables only writers to enjoy royalties, by toying with the perennial question, who killed them? High on the list of suspects for us is the infamous Duke of Gloucester, who takes the throne in 1483 to be known as Richard III, and he'll perform that piece now.
Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of York, and all the clouds that lowered upon our house in the deep bosom of the ocean buried. Now are our brows bound with victorious wreaths, our bruised arms hung up for monuments, our stern alarums changed to merry meetings, our dreadful marches to delightful measures. Grim-visaged war hath smoothed his wrinkled front, and now, instead of mounting barded steeds to fright the souls of fearful adversaries, he capers nimbly in a lady's chamber to the lascivious pleasing of a lute. But I, that am not shaped for sportive tricks, nor made to court an amorous looking-glass, I, that am rudely stamped and want love's majesty to strut before a wanton ambling nymph, I, that am curtailed of this fair proportion, cheated of feature by dissembling nature, deformed, unfinished, sent before my time into this breathing world scarce half made up, and that so lamely and unfashionable that dogs bark at me as I halt by them. Why, I, in this weak, piping time of peace, have no delight to pass away the time, unless to spy my shadow in the sun and descant on mine own deformity. And therefore, since I cannot prove a lover to entertain these fair, well-spoken days, I am determined to prove a villain and hate the idle pleasures of these days.
Henry VI lies dead and buried at Chertsey Abbey, close to Windsor, where miracles are said to happen at his tomb. And as Shakespeare's Richard III, Act 4, Scene 4 relates, Margaret of Anjou lives on, a widow hungry for revenge, listing those she blames for the death of the Lancastrian family. In conversation with Queen Elizabeth Woodville, widowed from Edward IV, the 2 black widows further dehumanize Richard to cast him as a spider and a dog and a toad, but not a bear.
Bear with me. I am hungry for revenge, and now I cloy me with beholding it. Thy Edward, he is dead, that stabbed my Edward. The other Edward dead to quit my Edward. Thy Clarence, he is dead, that killed my Edward. And the beholders of this tragic play, the adulterate Hastings, Rivers, and the rest, untimely smothered in their dusky graves, Richard yet lives, hell's black intelligencer that brought them hither. But at hand, ensues his piteous and unpitied end. Earth gapes, hell burns, fiends roar, saints pray to have him suddenly conveyed away. Cancel his bond of life, dear God. I pray that I may live to say the dog is dead.
O thou didst prophesy the time would come that I should wish for thee to help me curse that bottled spider, that foul, bunched-back toad.
I called thee then, vain flourish of my fortune. I called thee then, poor shadow, painted queen, the presentation of but what I was, the flattering index of a direful pageant, one heaved high to be hurled below, a mother only mocked with two sweet babes. A dream of what thou wert, a breath, a bubble, a sign of dignity, a garish flag to be the aim of every dangerous shot, a queen in jest, only to fill a scene. Where is thy husband now? Where are thy brothers? Where are thy children? Wherein dost thou joy? Who sues to thee and says, God save the Queen? Where be the bending peers that flattered thee? Where be the thronging troops that followed thee? Decline all this, and see what now thou art. Thus hath the course of justice wheeled about, and left thee but the very prey of time. Thou didst usurp my place, and dost thou now usurp the just proportion of my sorrow? Now thy proud neck bears half my burdened yoke, from which, even here, I slip my weary neck and leave the burden of it all on thee. Farewell, York's wife, and queen of sad mischance. These English woes will make me smile in France.
You will recall that Margaret of Anjou had 30 years past fled from Coventry to Jasper Tudor in Wales. Now Jasper's nephew, Henry Tudor, Earl of Richmond, who's been exiled for 14 years in northern France, is mounting a campaign to overthrow Richard. In the heat of a summer awaiting harvest in August 1485, his journey leads from Brittany to the south coast of Wales near his birthplace at Pembroke, onto Bosworth Field in Leicestershire, just 18 miles north of here in the heart of England. And this leads us back to Shakespeare again, to meet the victor, the Earl of Richmond, the 21-year-old Henry Tudor, who will soon become King Henry VII.
Inter their bodies as becomes their births. Proclaim a pardon to the soldiers fled that in submission will return to us. And then, as we have ta'en the sacrament, we will unite the white rose and the red. Smile heaven upon this fair conjunction that long have frowned upon their enmity. What traitor hears me and says not amen? England hath long been mad and scarred herself. the brother blindly shed the brother's blood? The father rashly slaughtered his own son. The son, compelled, been butchered to the sire. All this divided York and Lancaster, divided in their dire division. Oh, now, let Richmond and Elizabeth, the true succeeders of each royal house, by God's fair ordinance conjoin together. And let their heirs, God, if thy will be so, enrich the time to come with smooth-faced peace. Abate the edge of traitors, gracious Lord, that would reduce these bloody days again and make poor England weep in streams of blood. Let them not live to taste this land's increase, that would with treason wound this fair land's peace. Now civil wounds are stopped. Peace lives again. That she may long live here, God, say amen.
As the torn body of Richard III is slumped on the back of a horse and hauled away to Leicester, to Greyfriars, where a dignified but modest stone will wherever mark his burial place. For who would destroy a church to make way for a stable or cart store or such? The wheel of fortune turns and the victor's troops have made their way to, well, guess where is the first stop after Bosworth? It's Coventry, and they need a drink. This innkeeper's wife is here to tell her story.
They call me the innkeeper's wife, but I don't need a man in my life. See, the men, they're out fighting wars, while I prefer life indoors. I just saw the soldiers of Tudor. Oh, those boys. I've never met ruder. Limping from damnation's vale, calling, "Wench, fetch me an ale!" And the scars I saw, and how they bled, yet they were lucky, for my son lies dead. Yes, they call me an innkeeper's wife, but I don't need a man in my life.
Under the careful eye of his Lancastrian mother, Margaret Beaufort, descendant of John of Gaunt, Henry VII marries Elizabeth of York on the 18th of January, 1486. Prince Arthur is born the following September. Their children securing a future, they began a campaign to canonize Henry VI, who Henry regarded as his uncle. The authority of royal sainthood now permeates this Lancastrian town. Moreover, in this same hall, which once served as a seat of parliament. And this magnificent tapestry, much the oldest in Britain to hang in its intended location, shows the Virgin in the Hall of St. Mary, in a city where the seal of the Mercers represented the crowned Virgin rising out of the clouds. The Trinity Guild is represented here too. But why am I telling you this? Here's the man who made it, Arnaud Poissonnier of Tournai.
The tapestry business is huge in cities like Tournai and Bruges. For halls and chambers, I'll weave you rainbows of blue, gold, green, and rouge. I work for long days at my loom, so wide it takes up my whole room. And the visions I make, many years they can take, though they start from just a cartoon. This one was a special commission. When so often I make an addition, but just for this hall, see, it fits the end wall. There won't be not one repetition. There are three main parts I should mention. The central one, Mary's ascension. She rises above with the grace of a dove to the Trinity. Oh, that grabs your attention. This side on the left, do you know? It shows martyrs from long, long ago. George with his cross, St. Peter, his boss, John the Baptist, his lamb, white as snow. Beneath them, you see quite a mix of the circle of King Henry VI. There's Talbot around, and King Richard's around, yes, up to his devilish tricks. On the right, oh, and she looks such a treat, a kneeling Queen Marguerite. Her courtiers behind, and above them you'll find St. Margaret and the dragon she beat. So yes, I'm pleased with this piece. It should last well past my decease. Their rules a rage, till they fade to beige, and their texture reverts to old fleece. Oh, one more thing about weaving is moths. Wool threads can be heaving with critters that nibble and gobble and dribble. Okay, that's enough. Now I'm leaving.
From the reign of Henry VII's granddaughter, Elizabeth I, William Shakespeare left us a legacy that threads the story of late medieval Coventry, and we've been grateful to share it with you tonight.
The royal parades that swept through our town were a century long, though of lasting renown. Each king and queen in their finest blue gown brought to this place their court and their crown.
Yet battles they fought in the names of roses, white and red, picked for bloodshed, not posies. Though rulers' disputes are as old as Moses, these cut off their faces to spite their noses.
Well, Coventry then stood within its fair walls, with priories, convents, churches, guild halls. From merchants' houses see their wealth sprawls, while the brawls in the wars wove funeral palls.
Destruction? It came here in several guises. The Wars of the Roses won very few prizes. But, according to the most recent surmises, Henry's 6 and 7 left what your eye sees.
These splendid adornments live on in this place, though royals cut their noses to spite their face. The disillusion smashed down the priory's grace, and the Civil War came, turned walls into lace.
Though the whole nation suffered this fracture, through Coventry's smoke arose manufacture. The merchants of cloth, who never attacked you, became makers of clock, bike, car, and tractor. Sent to Coventry, once a cry of derision, yet ingenious hands here fashioned precision. Modernity brought blitz and nuclear fission. Now reconciliation and peace are our mission. So celebrate the art and the beauty withal, the glass and the hanging adorning this hall, in Shakespeare country which never shall fall. From the bard and from us, good night one and all.
Ladies and gentlemen, our tale is done. But I don't wish it to end without saying just a few more words. You've heard about these fascinating people, these real people, about whom Jonathan has spoken so eloquently and whose images he's brought to life tonight. Now I make a final plea for donations to help us towards the figure that appears in your synopsis. And now I must say our final thanks. First to Julian Smith, John Webber, Mark Howarth and Derek Parker, the Borton Trombone Quartet. Next, to our Criterion actors, Helen Withers, Hugh Sorrell, Catherine Bowler, Gareth Withers, and Keith Railton. You have their programme on your seats for the rest of the year. Go and see something, please. And finally, Thanks to our narrator, Dr. Jonathan Foyle. I hope you've enjoyed this evening as much as I have. Thank you very much for coming, and please spread the word about Coventry's treasures. Feel free to stay on for a few minutes and take a closer look at them. Thank you very much.